Mr. President, as the senator from Arizona and the senator from Connecticut have done in their ways eloquently, I would like to express on behalf of the people of Tennessee my sympathy, our sympathy to the people of Japan and the devastation they've experienced. I applaud the administration and the American people for their immediate response to offer assistance, charitable aid, and search and rescue teams to find survivors. There's no more important two-country alliance than that of Japan or the United States. The former majority leader and ambassador Mike Mansfield used to teach that to all of us younger governors during the 1980s and 90s. And we will stand with the people of Japan until they recover from this disaster. There's a special relationship between the Japanese and Tennesseans because of the location of so many Japanese industries in our state over the last 30 years. So as a result, Tennesseans have been reaching out to our friends and their families in Japan. We should also commend the Japanese for their courage that they've shown in dealing with the devastation, and particularly with their level-headed response to the damage at their nuclear reactors at Fukushima Daiichi. In this age when instant communication can sometimes create misinformation and even panic, the Japanese leadership and nuclear scientists are working with organizations from around the world in responding to the danger and keeping the rest of the world informed. This is the largest earthquake in Japan's recorded history, 30 times more forceful than the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, 700 times stronger than the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. So while the risk is no means over, and the events in Japan continue to evolve, the reactor safety systems so far appear to have done their job in withstanding the earthquakes, tsunami, power loss, and explosions, and none of the reactor containment structures seem to have been breached in these worst-case conditions. So the lessons that Americans can take away from this tragedy is this: learn all we can from the Japanese experience to make the operation of American reactors as safe as possible. Mr. President, I'd ask for an additional 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, since the 1950s, the United States Navy has safely traveled more than 136 million miles on nuclear power. Today, 104 civilian reactors produce 20% of America's electricity and 70% of our clean electricity. That is, without sulfur, without nitrogen, without mercury, or without carbon. No one has ever died from a nuclear accident at any of our commercial or Navy reactors. Let me say that again. No one has ever died from a reactor accident at one of our Navy or commercial reactors. Without nuclear power, it is hard to imagine how the United States could produce enough cheap, reliable, clean electricity to keep our economy moving and keep our jobs from going overseas. Here's what we know about what has happened in Japan. We've all seen the video of the explosion of the building at Daiichi Unit 1 and now Unit 3, and I'm sure that many of us have thought that those were reactors exploding. Fortunately, that's not what happened. A buildup of hydrogen gas in the secondary containment structures led to explosions which destroyed the buildings themselves, but the primary containment structures inside appear not to have been compromised. To reduce the resulting increase in containment pressure, a relatively small amount of radioactive vapor has been dispersed into the atmosphere. The Tokyo Electric Power Company has told us that the highest level of radiation detected on site to date is 155.7 millirem per hour, and that level has since been reduced to 4.4 millirem per hour. What does that mean in regard to human exposure risk? To help put that in perspective, here's a couple of facts. The average American receives about 300 millirem of radiation exposure each year from naturally occurring sources such as the sun, and another 300 millirem of radiation exposure from medical applications such as CT scans and X-rays. What did happen after the earthquake is that the ensuing tsunami crippled the backup electrical generators and batteries needed to keep cooling water circulating in the plants after they had been safely shut down. This ultimately led to use of the last line of defense emergency core cooling system, flooding the entire containment vessel with seawater. While this pretty much assures that the reactors won't ever be used again, as long as the seawater continues to be pumped in, the possibilities of further damage ought to be halted. People have been evacuated, and authorities are taking every precaution, and that, of course, is what we'd like to see. Despite one of the largest earthquakes in the world's history, with accompanying tsunamis, fires, and aftershocks, multiple disasters compounded one on top of another, the primary containment at reactors near the epicenter appear not to have been breached, and the radioactive release appears to have been controlled and minimal. This experience has brought back memories of the 1979 accident at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. Although we remember 3 Mile Island as the worst nuclear accident in U.S. history, it's also important to remember that no one was hurt at 3 Mile Island. As I said before, there's never been a death resulting from a commercial nuclear accident in American history. What happened at 3 Mile Island was basically an operator failure. A valve failed, and when the automatic safety mechanism kicked in, the operators overrode it because they became confused by the number of alarms. 3 Mile Island completely changed the American nuclear industry. The Kennedy Commission, appointed by President Carter, analyzed the problems, made many recommendations, almost all of which have been put into practice. The valve that started the whole thing had failed 9 times before in other reactors, but the manufacturer had tried to keep it a secret. People in the nuclear industry then just didn't talk to each other. Now, safety is a top priority of the nuclear industry. The Institute of Nuclear Power Operations collectively shares best practices to achieve the highest levels of safety as well as reliability. Nuclear operators train for 5 years before they can take over in the control room. They spend 1 week out of every 5 to 6 weeks in a simulator honing their skills. The nuclear companies have special emergency teams that can be dispatched anywhere in the country at a moment's notice. A Nuclear Regulatory Commission inspector practically lives on site. What's more, every reactor in the country is on the hook for $100 million if something goes wrong at another reactor. As you can imagine, they watch each other very carefully. And I've talked with any number of Navy veterans who had experience with nuclear commands, and one reason I'm confident that there haven't been any nuclear reactor accidents in the nuclear Navy that have killed anyone over the last half century is because the responsibility for the safety of that reactor goes right up to the captain of the vessel. All this wasn't the same at Chernobyl, the infamous 1986 Soviet accident. Chernobyl involved 60 immediate deaths and radiation exposures that, according to the World Health Organization, may eventually result in 4,000 cancers. But Chernobyl was a completely different kind of accident and the result of different technology. More than that, the Soviets hadn't built a containment structure at Chernobyl. The containment structures at these Japanese reactors, 40 to 80 inches thick concrete and steel, appear, as we speak this afternoon, to have withstood an 8.9 magnitude earthquake, a tsunami, power failure, and explosion. Mr. President, there are gas and oil fires raging in Japan. Water and sewer systems are damaged. The possibility of disease and starvation are imminent. There are a great many things to worry about, in addition to the problems with the Japanese reactor. There are tens of thousands of people still unaccounted for. Right now, the effort needs to be helping those who need help, containing further damage and risk, and getting Japan back up and running again. Then we can take the lessons learned from this earthquake and tsunami and apply them to make our nuclear plants as safely as possible and help the world do the same. America's 104 nuclear reactors provide, as I mentioned earlier, 20% of our electricity, 70% of our clean electricity. Japan has 54 reactors and gets 30% of its electricity from nuclear. France gets 80% of its electricity from nuclear power. The United States invented nuclear power, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has not issued a construction license for a new reactor in more than 30 years. There are 65 reactors under construction around the world outside the United States right now, but only one of those 65 is in the United States, and that's the construction of a previously halted project at the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Japanese and the French have surged into the lead in terms of nuclear power and are now being challenged by Korea and Russia on the international market. And China, with 27 nuclear reactors currently under construction, will soon join them all. Nuclear power today provides about 15% of the world's electricity. There are always risks with every form of energy. It's important that we be clear about the risks that each type of energy poses. But it's also important to remember that we don't abandon highway systems because bridges and overpasses collapse during earthquakes. The 1.6 million of us who fly daily would not stop flying after a tragic airplane crash. We cannot stop drilling after a tragic oil spill unless we want to rely more on foreign oil, run up our prices, turn our oil drilling over to a few big oil companies, and all our oil hauling over to more leaky tankers. 34,000 people die in motor vehicle accidents every year, but we don't stop driving because we have to get our children to work and our children to school and ourselves to work. In all of these cases, when there are accidents, we do our best to examine the tragedies and make our continued operation and our lives as safe as possible. That's what we need to do here. Our reactors in the United States are built to the highest standards in the world. The chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said in a press briefing today, right now, we believe that the nuclear power plants in this country operate safely and securely. The chairman said nuclear power plants in the United States are designed to very high standards for earthquake effects. All our plants are designed to withstand significant natural phenomena like earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis. We will take whatever steps are necessary, the chairman continued, to ensure the safety and security of nuclear power plants in the country. But right now, we believe we have a very strong program in place. As we get more information from Japan, said the chairman of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, as this immediate crisis ultimately comes to an end, we will look at whatever information we can gain from this event and see if there are any changes we need to make in our system. The Deputy Secretary of Energy said nuclear power has been a critical component of the United States energy portfolio. The White House press secretary, on behalf of President Obama, said nuclear power remains a part of the president's overall energy plan. Despite the fact that there has never been a death as a result of the operation of a commercial American reactor, nor in our nuclear navy, which has been using reactors in its ships and submarines since the 1950s, our goal should be to continue every effort to try to make certain that the operation of our existing and new nuclear power plants are as safe as possible. For example, some have suggested that so-called passive cooling systems that operate on natural convection currents and don't need pumping would prevent the problems that arose in Japan when the backup power to pump water was lost. Mr. President, nuclear power is a demanding but manageable technology. As we move forward, let us learn the proper lessons from this Japanese experience to make sure that in the United States and in the world, we are even better prepared for the unexpected events of the future. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.